The night it happened, the city felt colder than usual, not because of the weather, but because of the way people had learned to look past suffering. Neon lights flickered over wet pavement, and the hum of traffic blended with distant sirens into a sound that never quite slept. She was walking home with a paper bag clutched to her chest, every step measured, every breath controlled. Inside the bag were leftovers from a diner that had let her wash dishes for an hour in exchange for food. It wasn't dignity, but it was survival. She kept her eyes low, not from shame, but from experience. Looking up invited attention, and attention had rarely been kind. The alley shortcut had always saved her 10 minutes, but that night it became the place where her life threatened to break. The man stepped out from the shadows with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him obedience. His voice was calm, practiced, sharp with power. "On your knees," he demanded, not with lust, but with cruelty, the kind that feeds on fear. It was a command meant to erase her, to reduce her to nothing more than a moment of control in his empty night. Her heart slammed against her ribs, and time seemed to stretch, every sound magnified, every thought screaming at once. She thought of all the moments that had led her there. The eviction notice taped to her door months ago. The job interview that promised hope and delivered silence. The nights she had cried quietly so the neighbors wouldn't complain. She thought of how many times she had stood back up after life pushed her down, and how tired she was of standing alone. Her knees trembled, not because she wanted to obey, but because fear is heavy, and it presses down on the body as much as on the mind. She tasted metal in her mouth and wondered if this was the moment she would finally disappear. The man stepped closer, his shadow swallowing the light behind her. His shoes scraped the ground, deliberate, slow. He enjoyed the pause, the waiting, the way power grows when someone else feels small. She searched the alley for escape, but it was narrow, boxed in by brick and steel, a corridor designed to trap sound and hope. Her hands shook around the paper bag, the grease soaking through like a reminder of how fragile everything was. She told herself to breathe, to think, to remember that fear lies, that it tells you you're alone even when you're not. That was when footsteps echoed from the street beyond the alley, firm and unhurried. Another presence entered the space, and with it came a shift so sudden it felt like a change in gravity. The stranger didn't shout or rush. He didn't brandish a weapon or make threats. He simply spoke, and his voice carried a steadiness that cut through the tension like light through fog. "That's enough," he said, not loud, but certain. It wasn't a request. It wasn't bravado. It was the sound of someone who had decided, without hesitation, that this was not going to happen. The man turned, irritation flashing across his face, then something else, something closer to uncertainty. Predators rely on isolation. They rely on silence. They rely on the belief that no one will intervene. The stranger stood between them, hands visible, posture relaxed but rooted. He didn't insult. He didn't escalate. He met the man's eyes with a calm that refused to bend. "Walk away," he said. "You don't want what comes next." There was no threat in his words, only consequence, the quiet confidence of someone who knew where he stood. For a moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. The city seemed to hold its breath. Then the man scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and stepped back. Power drained from him as quickly as it had appeared. He disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the same shadows he had used to intimidate. The alley felt different instantly, wider, brighter, safer, even though nothing physical had changed except who was standing there. She didn't realize she had sunk to the ground until she felt the cold through her clothes. Her legs had finally given in, the adrenaline rushing out of her like water from a broken dam. The stranger knelt a few feet away, careful not to crowd her, careful to give space. "You're safe," he said, again and again, as if repeating it could stitch the words into reality. She nodded, unable to speak, tears streaming without permission. They weren't tears of weakness. They were the release of something she had been carrying for too long. When she finally looked up, she saw not a hero from a movie, not someone impossibly perfect, but an ordinary man with tired eyes and a kindness that looked practiced, as if he used it often. He offered his jacket without a word. She hesitated, then accepted, wrapping herself in warmth that felt like a memory of better days. "Thank you," she whispered, the words too small for what he had done, but all she had. He smiled softly and shrugged. Anyone would have done the same, he said, though both of them knew that wasn't true. They walked out of the alley together, not touching, but close enough that the space between them felt protective. At the corner, he asked if she had somewhere safe to go. She hesitated again, then told the truth. He listened without interruption, without judgment, his attention steady. He didn't offer solutions he couldn't keep. He didn't promise miracles. He offered choices. A ride, a meal, a phone call, respect wrapped in options, power returned to her where it belonged. At the diner, under fluorescent lights that buzzed like tired insects, she ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be the last. The stranger sat across from her, sipping coffee, letting silence be comfortable. When she finished, he slid a card across the table. It wasn't money. It was a name and a number. "If you ever need help," he said, "or if you just need someone to answer the phone." She stared at the card, then tucked it carefully into her pocket, not because she planned to use it, but because knowing it existed mattered. They parted ways outside, the night less hostile than before. As she walked home, jacket pulled tight, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was possibility. The knowledge that even in a city that often looked away, someone had chosen to step in. Someone had seen her not as a problem, not as an inconvenience, but as a person worth protecting. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night replayed in her mind, not as a wound, but as a turning point. She found herself standing a little taller, meeting her reflection with less anger. She used the number once, not in crisis, but in courage. The conversation that followed led to a job lead, then an interview, then a start date. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was slow, uneven, real, but it was forward. Months later, she passed the alley again, sunlight pouring in where shadows once ruled. She paused, heart beating faster, then kept walking. The place no longer owned her fear. She owned her story. She volunteered at a local shelter, listening to others who carried the same tired hope she once had. When she told them her story, she didn't focus on the man who had tried to break her. She focused on the stranger who had stepped in, not because he was special, but because he chose to be present. And that is the truth this story leaves us with. Evil often thrives not because it is strong, but because it is unchallenged. Change doesn't always come with grand speeches or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it comes with a simple decision to say, "That's enough." Sometimes it comes from an ordinary person choosing to act when it would be easier to walk away. And sometimes, that choice doesn't just save a moment. It changes a life forever. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage still exists in quiet places, take a second to support this channel. Stories like this matter because they remind us who we can be. Subscribe, stay with us, and be part of a community that believes one action, one voice, one step forward can change everything.